I turned 48 that morning, waking up before the alarm, not because I was excited about my birthday, but because something inside me felt slightly off, like the air in the room had shifted overnight. My husband, Daniel, was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed with his back to me, shoulders tense beneath his white t-shirt. He didn't notice I was watching him, or maybe he did and pretended not to. We had been married 26 years, long enough to read each other's silences better than any words. He cleared his throat, stood up abruptly, and forced a smile as he turned. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," he said, leaning in to kiss me. But even his kiss felt distant, rehearsed, like he was performing a role instead of being my husband. I brushed it off as midlife stress, the kind men drown in quietly until something breaks. I didn't know something had already broken, decades before I ever met him. The house felt unusually quiet as I moved through my morning routine. Even the coffee machine hummed softer, the floor creaked differently. Daniel kept checking his phone, typing quickly, hiding the screen whenever I passed by. My stomach tightened, but I didn't ask. People think marriages crumble suddenly, but they don't. They rot slowly, silently under the surface, until one day the truth pushes through like a weed cracking concrete. By noon, the kitchen smelled of vanilla and warm sugar because I had baked my own birthday cake, a habit I formed after realizing Daniel never remembered to order one. He came downstairs at last, unusually dressed in a crisp blue shirt and cologne he hadn't worn in years, the fancy one I bought him when our daughter graduated high school. "We're having guests," he said, smoothing his collar nervously. "For your birthday." My eyebrows rose automatically. Daniel hated hosting people. He hated noise, hated any disruption to his quiet routines. "Who?" I asked. He swallowed hard, eyes darting toward the front door as if expecting it to burst open. "Old friends," he murmured. That was when I knew something was wrong. Daniel didn't have old friends, not the kind who would show up unannounced on my birthday. The doorbell rang 20 minutes later. He froze. Not walked, froze, like prey sensing a predator. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked past him, confused but smiling politely, because marriage teaches you to hold your composure even when your gut screams. When I opened the door, 3 strangers stood on my porch. A woman in her 50s with soft brown eyes and trembling hands, a young man in his 20s with Daniel's jawline, and a teen girl clutching the woman's arm. I stared, my birthday smile fading slowly like a candle losing its flame. The woman spoke first. "Hello, I'm Maria." Her voice cracked with something heavy. We're here to see Daniel." I didn't turn back to call him. I didn't need to. He was already behind me, breathing, hard, eyes wide, the colour draining from his face. The silence between us stretched and snapped like a rubber band. The young man stepped forward, jaw clenched. "Dad?" he whispered, and the world tilted. "Dad." The word hit me like a slap, sharp and surreal. I looked at Daniel, hoping, begging, for some kind of explanation, denial, anything that made sense. But all he did was close his eyes, exhale shakily, and nod. "Come inside," Daniel said quietly, not to me but to them. They walked past me as if they had every right to enter my home, and apparently they did, for 30 years. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I closed the door, the slam echoing through the house. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break every plate in the kitchen, every frame on the wall. But instead, I inhaled deeply, steadied myself, and walked to the dining room where they had already gathered. Daniel stood between 2 lives, the one he had with me and the one he had hidden. I didn't cry. I didn't attack him. I sat down gracefully, hands clasped, birthday candles flickering behind me. "So," I said, my voice eerily calm, "someone explain." Maria's eyes filled with tears instantly. "We never meant to show up like this," she said. "But after 30 years, the truth deserved to breathe." She glanced at Daniel. He looked at the floor. The young man stared at me with something that wasn't quite anger, but wasn't kindness either. The girl watched everything with wide, confused eyes. My hands trembled under the table as Maria spoke. About the relationship that began when she and Daniel were barely adults. About the promises he made, the future he planned, the child she carried, and how everything fell apart when Daniel left suddenly and never returned. My husband's breaths grew ragged. Shame dripped off him like sweat. For 26 years I believed I knew the man sleeping beside me. For 26 years he hid an entire family behind a curtain of silence. And yet I didn't fall apart. I only felt a strange, icy clarity settling over me. Because today wasn't just my birthday. Today was the day I had planned for. The day I would finally open the box I had kept hidden for months. The day Daniel would learn he wasn't the only one with secrets. I smiled slowly, looking directly at him. "Daniel," I said softly, "before we go any further, I have something for you." His head snapped up, fear flickered in his eyes. "A birthday tradition," I added. And I stood up, walked to the cabinet by the stairs, and pulled out a small, beautifully wrapped box. One he had never noticed. A box he would soon wish he had. Daniel stared at the box in my hands as if it were ticking, as if any second it might explode and scatter the truth across the room the same way he had just scattered my life. I walked back to the table slowly, deliberately, feeling every pair of eyes track my movements. Maria looked worried, her brows tightening, while the young man's jaw flexed with suspicion. The teenage girl shrank into her chair, sensing tension thick enough to cut with a knife. But Daniel, he looked terrified, and for the first time in 26 years, I didn't feel guilty for letting him feel it. "Open it," I said, setting the box in front of him. My voice was soft but carried an edge I didn't bother masking. Daniel's hands shook as he reached for the ribbon. He glanced up at me again, searching my face for mercy, reassurance, anything familiar. But he found nothing. He took a shallow breath and lifted the lid. His eyes widened instantly, colour draining from his cheeks. Inside lay a stack of documents, photos, receipts, copies of messages, printed pages, all neatly organised and bound with a paperclip. Evidence. He looked at me as if I had stabbed him. Where did you get all this?" he whispered. "You think you're the only one who can hide things?" I asked calmly, leaning back in my chair. "You think you're the only one capable of lying?" Silence washed over the room. I could almost hear the sound of his world cracking open. He reached for the papers with trembling fingers, skimming through them frantically. The more he read, the faster his breathing grew. The photos showed him meeting with someone he thought I didn't know about. Receipts traced money he'd withdrawn secretly. Messages revealed conversations he had tried to bury. And in the middle of it all, an ultrasound image dated 6 months earlier. Maria's eyes widened when Daniel reached that page. She looked confused, then panicked. "Wait," she said shakily. It's not yours," I told her gently. "Don't worry." Her shoulders sagged with relief so sharp she nearly collapsed. But Daniel sat frozen, fingers locked around the ultrasound photo like a man clinging to the last thread of denial. "This isn't real," he whispered. "It can't be. It's very real," I interrupted. "Every appointment, every bill, every message, every lie you told when you thought I was asleep." He looked up at me, eyes glossy and overflowing with confusion and fear. "You're pregnant?" he managed to choke out. "No," I said, almost pitying him. "I'm not." His breath caught, panic flared in his eyes. He looked back down at the ultrasound, at the name on the paperwork, at the signature on the bottom. His signature. I didn't, this isn't." He shook his head so violently the chair beneath him scraped against the floor. Maria's hand flew to her mouth, horrified. The young man swore under his breath, pushing up from the table as if ready to confront Daniel physically. The teen girl clutched her chest. overwhelmed. I spoke quietly, every word measured. You told me you were working late. You told me you were stressed. You told me you were tired. You told me you were loyal. I leaned in slightly, my voice low and steady. But what you didn't know is that you parked your car in the same place every time. You texted from the same pattern. You thought you were careful. But you're predictable, Daniel. You've always been predictable. He was shaking now, gripping the edge of the table as if the room was spinning. So who is she? The young man snapped. Another woman? Another family? Daniel didn't answer. Couldn't. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. I continued for him. Her name is Evelyn. She's 29. She works in the office next to his. She's pregnant with his child. The child he's been secretly preparing to support. Maria gasped like she'd been struck. The young man cursed again, pacing. The girl burst into tears, burying her face in her hands. And Daniel finally broke. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, he whispered, voice raw, cracking. I was going to tell you, I just needed time. I didn't know how. You had 30 years to learn, I replied quietly. You obviously didn't. His head dropped into his hands. I watched him crumble, watched the weight of every lie crush him from the inside. It felt surreal, seeing the man I once trusted unravel like this. But I didn't feel satisfaction, not even anger anymore, just a strange, hollow acceptance. A part of me had suspected this for months, long before Maria and her children stepped into my doorway. The late nights, the stress, the sudden withdrawals, the distant eyes, the way he flinched whenever his phone buzzed. I wasn't blind. I just wasn't ready to admit the truth until today, my birthday, a day he chose to destroy our life with a single word. Dad. Why today? I asked softly. Why bring them now? Daniel lifted his head slowly. His eyes were red, swollen, ashamed. Because I knew she was going to show up, he whispered. Maria. She called me yesterday. She said she couldn't live in the shadow of the lie anymore. I panicked. I thought if I controlled the moment, if I brought them here, I could explain everything before it exploded. I stared at him, bewildered. Daniel, you didn't control anything. He nodded weakly, staring at the table. I know. Maria finally spoke again, voice trembling. I didn't know about her either, she said, gesturing to me. If I had known he was married, I would have never. It doesn't matter now, I said gently. We're all victims of the same man. And then I looked at Daniel, the man I shared a home, a bed, a life with. But I'm done being quiet. His eyes widened slightly, fear pulsing through them. What does that mean? He whispered. I stood up slowly, steady, calm. It means the next decision isn't yours. The room fell silent as my words settled over them like a cold shadow. They had no idea what I meant, but they would, very soon. The room felt smaller as I stood there, every pair of eyes fixed on me, the weight of my words still hanging thick in the air. Daniel sat slumped in his chair, shoulders shaking subtly, as if he were holding back the urge to either scream or collapse entirely. Maria clutched her daughter's hand, her fingers trembling with mingled guilt and shock. The young man stood rigid, chest heaving, the kind of anger in his eyes that only comes from decades of abandonment and unanswered questions. I took a slow breath and reached for the documents still in the box, lifting them with care, as though handling something poisonous. For months, I began quietly, I kept finding pieces that didn't fit. Receipts in your jacket pockets, missed calls from numbers that never spoke when I answered, deposits disappearing from our account. Daniel looked up, eyes bloodshot, pleading for forgiveness before I'd even finished. I thought maybe you were sick, I continued, or scared, or hiding something small, but I never imagined another family. And then another child. He flinched at the word child, a hollow sound escaping his throat. The teen girl squeezed her mother's hand tighter, her eyelashes wet, her chest rising with silent sobs. The young man took a step toward Daniel, fists tightening. "You left us," he said, voice shaking with rage. "You left us and lived another whole life like we never existed, and now you have a baby with someone else." Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out except a broken, breathless apology, barely audible. "Please, I never meant—" "You never meant," I snapped, my voice cutting through his as sharply as a blade. "You never meant to tell me the truth. You never meant to stop lying. You never meant to take responsibility, and yet you managed to repeat the same betrayal again and again." My hands were trembling now, not from fear, but from a strange mix of grief and clarity. "I loved you," I said, softer this time, "more than you deserved, and you repaid that love with secrets." Daniel's face crumpled. "I was young," he whispered. "When I left Maria, I was stupid, scared. Then I met you and I thought I could start over. I thought if I buried the past deep enough, it would stay buried. I didn't want to ruin what we had." I shook my head. "But you didn't just bury your past. You buried people. You buried lives." Maria's voice cracked as she spoke again. "I spent years wondering what I did wrong, why he left, why he never came back. I raised 2 kids alone, while he was—" Her eyes slid toward me. "Making a new family." The girl beside her wiped her cheeks with her sleeve. "We just wanted to know why," she whispered, "why we weren't good enough." Something inside my chest twisted sharply at her words. That tremble, that heartbreak, none of it was her fault, or Maria's, or even her brother's. They didn't choose any of this. Daniel did. "You were good enough," I said gently. "You always were." The girl looked up, surprised by the kindness in my tone. Daniel looked ashamed, shrinking into himself. The young man crossed his arms, jaw clenched. "So what now?" he asked. "He just walks away again," I answered before Daniel could respond. "No, nobody walks away from this, especially not him." Daniel's breathing quickened. What do you mean?" I met his eyes directly. "I hired a lawyer." His face went pale. "A divorce lawyer," I added calmly. Maria gasped softly. Daniel grabbed the table edge as though the floor had dropped beneath him. "Wait, please, don't do this," he begged. "We can fix this." "We?" I repeated. "There hasn't been a we in months, maybe years." His voice cracked. "I'll cut things off with her. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't leave me." "You already left me," I whispered. "You just didn't have the courage to say it out loud." He shook his head repeatedly, like a child refusing to accept reality. "You're all I have." "No," I said evenly. "You have 3 families. You'll survive." The young man barked a humorless laugh, shaking his head. "Unbelievable." Maria looked between us, her face filled with a quiet sadness that made the whole moment feel even heavier. She wasn't here to destroy my marriage. She was here because her own had been destroyed 30 years ago. I took another breath and forced myself to remain steady. "The documents in that box," I continued, "aren't just proof of your infidelity. They're financial records, transfers, expenses, withdrawals, every appointment with her, every gift, every hotel bill." Daniel shut his eyes, pain contorting his face. "I needed insurance," I explained, "something that protected me in case you tried to twist the truth." "I wouldn't," he whispered desperately. "I swear." "You already did." He swallowed hard, hands trembling uncontrollably. The tension in the room tightened like a noose. Maria's daughter leaned closer to her mother. The young man stopped pacing and stared at me as if trying to understand what role I played in his father's double life. "So what happens next?" he asked again. I exhaled slowly. My decision was clear, but speaking it out loud felt like slicing open an old wound. "Next," I said, "we separate, legally, permanently." Daniel's face fell apart. "But the house is mine," I finished. "My name is on the deed. You'll leave today." Shock rippled across the room. Daniel shot up from his chair. "You can't do that." "I can," I replied calmly, "and I already filed." He staggered backward, gripping the edge of the counter like a drowning man reaching for a rope. "Please," he whispered, "please, don't do this." But it was already done. And what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the box he had opened was only the beginning. I had one more truth to reveal, one he would never see coming, one that would change everything again. Daniel stood there shaking, staring at me as though he were finally realizing I wasn't the quiet, forgiving wife he had always assumed I would be. I could almost see the moment everything shifted for him, the realization that the woman he betrayed was not the same woman now standing before him, ripping apart the last pieces of his carefully protected life. The room was silent except for the uneven breaths coming from all sides. Maria's daughter wiped her face again, trying to remain small in her chair, while her brother hovered protectively near her, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. Maria looked worn, exhausted, as if the years she had spent raising children alone were suddenly piling back onto her shoulders. But Daniel, he looked like a man staring at the ruins of a life he once believed was unshakable. "You can't just throw me out," he said weakly, his voice cracking as he tried to ground himself. I'm still your husband." The word froze me for a moment. Husband. He said it as if it still meant something, as if it hadn't been destroyed by decades of lies and the second family he had tried to hide behind my back. "You forfeited that title," I replied softly, "the moment you chose deception over honesty." His jaw trembled. "But where am I supposed to go?" "To the life you built outside these walls," I said. "Or to a hotel, or to a friend, it doesn't matter, but you won't stay here." Maria shifted uncomfortably, guilt washing over her face. "We don't have room," she whispered. Her voice carried a sadness that made Daniel's situation somehow even more pathetic. "And I don't think it would be good for the kids. Too much pain." The young man scoffed. "He's not coming with us." Daniel looked like he'd been punched. "I'm still your father," he managed to say. "You left," the young man snapped. "You don't get to use that word anymore." The tension thickened like fog. I watched Daniel's chest rise and fall rapidly, watched him struggle to hold on to whatever dignity he believed he had left. "Please," he whispered toward me again, voice frayed. "Don't do this. We can talk. We can work this out." I stared at him, not with hate, but with clarity so sharp it felt cold. "Daniel," I said, "even if you had been faithful until yesterday, even if this family had never walked through my door, I would still be done." He blinked, stunned. "Why?" My throat tightened as memories I had tried to bury resurfaced. The loneliness that lived inside my marriage, the nights I cried quietly beside a man who never noticed, the years I convinced myself his emotional distance was just stress, not indifference. "Because I've spent too many years begging for scraps of affection," I whispered. "Too many years, shrinking myself to fit into the space you allowed me to have. Too many years waiting for you to love me the way I loved you." Daniel's expression shifted. Shock, then guilt, then a crushing kind of realization. "I didn't know," he murmured. "You never told me." "I shouldn't have had to," I said. "A good husband notices his wife is wilting." Maria looked down, blinking back tears. She had wilted too. Maybe in different ways, for different reasons, but the pain was familiar. The young man crossed his arms again, eyes locked on Daniel. "So what happens now?" he asked me. "He walks out the door," I said simply. Daniel shook his head, stumbling forward a step. "I can't leave like this. I need time. I need a plan. You had 30 years to make a plan," I cut in. "I think that's enough time." He swallowed hard, desperation clawing through his voice. "Let me at least pack—" "Of course," I said. "I'm not cruel. You can pack your things, but you're leaving today." He nodded, defeated, his shoulders folding inward. For the first time since I'd met him, Daniel looked small, human, weak. And despite everything, a part of me felt a flicker of pity. Not forgiveness, just pity. He turned and slowly made his way toward the stairs, dragging his feet like they weighed 100 pounds each. The moment he disappeared upstairs, the house seemed to exhale. Maria let out a long breath, rubbing her temples. "I'm so sorry," she whispered to me. "I never meant to destroy your life." "You didn't destroy anything," I said gently. "He did. You just brought the truth." The young man sat down, exhausted. "I don't even know what to feel," he admitted. "Anger, relief, maybe nothing." "Feel what you need to," I said. "You deserved answers." He nodded quietly. Maria's daughter finally lifted her face, her voice fragile but brave. Are you going to be okay?" The question hit me harder than anything Daniel had said. I swallowed, steadying my voice. "Eventually," I told her. "Not today, maybe not next week, but one day, yes." She nodded, comforted by the certainty in my tone. I wasn't sure if I believed it yet, but saying it out loud gave it shape. Upstairs I heard drawers opening, a closet door slamming shut, the faint rustle of clothes being stuffed quickly into bags. Each sound felt like a chapter closing, a door locking, a future reshaped. When Daniel came down 15 minutes later, he looked like a man who had aged 10 years in one afternoon. His hair was dishevelled, his eyes raw, his duffel bag sagging at his side. "I'll call," he said weakly, his voice nearly gone. "Don't," I replied. "Let the lawyers talk." He flinched again. Slowly, painfully, he nodded. He walked toward the door, pausing for a moment as if waiting for someone, anyone, to stop him. No one did. Not me, not Maria, not his children. He opened the door, stepped outside and closed it behind him with a soft click. And as soon as the sound faded, I exhaled, long, shaky, freeing. But the story wasn't over, because while Daniel believed he had just lost everything, he had no idea that his absence would reveal something far darker, something buried deep inside my home, something that would make his betrayal look small. And the box he opened today was nothing compared to the door I was about to unlock next. The moment the door closed behind Daniel, the entire house shifted. It was subtle at first, like the air lightened, like the walls loosened their grip around secrets that had been trapped too long. Maria let out a shaky breath and leaned back in her chair, while her son rubbed his hands over his face, trying to process years of unanswered questions colliding into one terrible afternoon. The girl, barely 16 by the look of her, sat with her arms wrapped around herself, eyes still swollen from crying. But beneath all their shock, beneath all their pain, a strange silence settled, one that belonged not to them, but to me. I could feel it pressing against my ribs, cold and sharp, the silence of something I had been hiding far longer than Daniel had been hiding his affairs. "Are you sure you're okay?" Maria asked quietly, her voice gentle, cautious. I forced a small smile. "I'm more okay now than I was an hour ago." She nodded, though she didn't quite believe me. No one in that room believed I was truly fine, not after the kind of revelation that could shred a person from the inside. But what they didn't know was that Daniel's betrayal, as painful as it was, had not left me shattered. It had only cleared the fog. For months my life had felt suspended, every instinct whispering that something dark was stirring under the surface. I thought it was Daniel, but the truth was far closer, far older, and far more dangerous. "Would you like us to leave?" Maria asked softly. "We didn't mean to invade your life like this." "No," I said, surprising even myself. "Don't leave yet. Not just yet." They exchanged confused looks. I stood up slowly, feeling my heartbeat settle into a steady rhythm, as if preparing for something I had postponed too long. "There's something I need to show you," I said, the words coming out calm, almost eerily so. The young man frowned. "Show us what?" "The truth," I replied, "all of it." When Daniel left, he thought he was the only one who had detonated a secret today. But I had a truth buried deeper than his lies, one I had been protecting with quiet desperation, one that was about to erupt whether I wanted it to or not. I walked toward the hallway, gesturing for them to follow. They hesitated, but curiosity, and maybe a strange sense of unfinished justice, pulled them to their feet. "Where are we going?" Maria asked. "Downstairs," I said, "to the basement." The young man tensed. "Why?" "Because that's where everything started." We descended the narrow staircase one step at a time, the wooden steps creaking beneath our weight. The further we went, the colder the air became. My house was old, built nearly a century ago, and the basement always carried a heaviness that never fully went away. But this was different. The girl shivered, rubbing her arms. "It's freezing down here." "It always is," I murmured. The lights flickered on when I pulled the chain, revealing a cluttered basement filled with boxes, shelves, and old furniture. But the far wall was what they noticed first. The large metal cabinet bolted shut with a thick chain and padlock. The young man narrowed his eyes. "What is that?" "Protection," I replied, "from myself." They stared at me, unsettled, unsure what I meant. I approached the cabinet slowly. My fingers brushed the cold metal, and for a moment I felt my breath hitch, not from fear, but from the memories locked inside, memories I had sealed away for a reason. Daniel thought he was the only one capable of hiding something, I said quietly, but he never realized how much I've hidden from him. Maria swallowed hard. "What's inside?" I hesitated, not because I doubted my decision, but because speaking it out loud made it real. "You're not going to believe me," I said, reaching for the key hanging from a nail on the wall. "But that's the problem with the truth. It doesn't need to be believed to be real." I unlocked the padlock, the metal clinking sharply in the silent basement. The chain fell away, and I began pulling open the heavy cabinet doors. Their breaths caught. Inside, neatly stacked and meticulously organised, were dozens of binders, notebooks and files, each labelled with dates, names and locations. Maria took a small step forward, confused. The young man's brows furrowed in suspicion. The girl clung to her mother's sleeve. What is all this?" Maria whispered. I turned to them slowly. "Evidence," I said. "Years of evidence, tracking, recording, documenting." "Documenting what?" the young man asked. I held their gaze, steady and unflinching. "Men like Daniel." They stared at me, speechless. I continued, my voice low, deliberate. "Men who lie, men who run, men who build families in the shadows, men who think they can disappear without consequence." The young man stepped closer, eyes scanning the binders. "These names. They're real," I said. "Fathers who abandoned their families, husbands who vanished, partners who walked away without explanation." Maria's face paled. "Why would you have all this?" I took a breath, slow, steady, revealing the truth, piece by piece. "Because for 20 years, I whispered, I've been helping women find the men who disappeared from their lives." Their eyes widened. "I'm not just a wife," I said, "I'm a tracker." The girl gasped softly. Maria covered her mouth. The young man stared, as if seeing me for the first time. I turned back to the cabinet, running my fingers along the spines of the binders. "When Daniel started acting strangely, I didn't panic," I continued. "I investigated, the same way I've done for others, and when I realised what he'd done, to you, to me, to all of us, I documented everything." Their shock deepened as they slowly began to understand. "Daniel thought I was blindsided today," I said, closing the cabinet halfway. "But the truth is, I knew long before he confessed." I turned back to them, my expression calm, controlled. "And now that he's gone, it's time for the next step." "What step?" the boy asked. "Holding him accountable," I answered, "legally, financially, and publicly." Their eyes widened, and then I added, my voice colder than I intended. But first, I need your help." Maria stared at me as if the ground had shifted under her for the second time that day, and in a way it had, because this wasn't just about betrayal anymore, it was about something older, darker, and unfinished. Her son moved closer to the cabinet, scanning the labelled binders with a mix of suspicion and stunned respect, while her daughter clung to her arm, eyes wide and searching my face for some hint that this was all a joke. I set the cabinet key on the workbench and met their eyes. "I know this is a lot," I said quietly, my voice echoing slightly off the concrete walls, "but you deserve the whole truth, not just Daniel's version of it." Maria swallowed hard. "You said he was married before us?" I nodded. The private investigator found records from 32 years ago, marriage certificate, joint bank account. Her name was Angela. She disappeared a year later. No divorce, no closure, just gone. The young man's jaw clenched. "And you think he had something to do with it?" I took a deep breath. I think men like Daniel don't just get unlucky over and over. I think they follow patterns, run when things get complicated, rewrite history so they can sleep at night. I opened one of the folders and showed them printouts, old police reports, missing person bulletins, notes from the investigator. The PI traced his addresses, his jobs, his bank activity. Every time he left one life, he was already starting another. Maria's eyes filled with tears. "So we were just a stop on his way to something better?" "No," I said gently. "You were a home. He just never knew how to stay in one place without destroying it." The girl whispered, "So what happens now?" I looked at her, at the quiet storm behind her eyes, and realized she was the one I was really doing this for. Girls like her, like my sister, like the woman I used to be. "Now," I said, "we stop him from doing this to anyone else." We went back upstairs, the basement light clicking off behind us, like a curtain dropping on an old act. The house felt different without Daniel in it. Emptier, yes, but also clearer, like the air had been scrubbed of lies. I made coffee for all of us, not because it fixed anything, but because ordinary rituals keep people from falling apart. At the kitchen table, I laid out a folder with the legal plan I had prepared weeks earlier. "I already filed for divorce," Ganai explained, "and because I documented everything, my lawyer thinks we have a strong case for financial compensation. But there's more. My investigator has been talking to Angela's sister. She's still alive. She's still looking for answers." Maria looked stunned. "You reached out to her?" "I did," I said. "She didn't know about you. She didn't know about me. When she found out he'd built not one, but 2 more families after her sister vanished, she agreed to reopen the case with her local authorities." The young man leaned forward. "So he could actually face charges?" "If the evidence points that way," I said. "It might not bring back what everyone lost, but it will make sure he doesn't quietly rewrite the story again." He exhaled slowly, some of his anger softening into something else. "Resolve." "What do you need from us?" he asked. "Statements," I replied. "Descriptions of how he left you, times, dates, promises he made then broke, messages if you have them, anything that shows his pattern of abandonment and deception. My lawyer can include it when we file, and Angela's sister's lawyer can use it to support reopening her case." Maria wiped her cheeks. "I always thought I was stupid for trusting him," she whispered. "Now I see. He was just very good at lying." "You weren't stupid," I said firmly. "He was calculated. There's a difference." Her daughter finally spoke, voice small but steady. Will we ever see him again?" Maria looked at me, as if I could answer that for all of them. I chose my words carefully. "Maybe in a courtroom," I said. "Maybe not. But if you do, it won't be as the people he abandoned. It will be as the people holding him accountable." The girl nodded slowly, holding on to that idea like a rope. Hours passed as we talked, as I showed them what I had gathered, as they filled in the blanks with memories that hurt to speak but felt healing to release. At one point, Maria touched my hand and whispered, "Why did you do all this? For us?" I shook my head. "Not just for you. For every woman who ever sat alone, wondering what she did wrong. For my sister, for myself, for you, for your daughter, for any future woman who might have fallen for men like Daniel if we'd stayed quiet. When they finally left that evening, we hugged at the door. Not as strangers bound by one man's betrayal, but as survivors who had just agreed to stop carrying the blame that was never theirs. As they walked down the driveway, the sun was setting in streaks of deep orange and red, painting the sky like an ending and a beginning at the same time. I closed the door gently and leaned against it, letting the silence of the house wrap around me. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel cold, it felt clean. I walked back to the kitchen, looked at the half-melted birthday candles on the untouched cake, and let out a soft, humourless laugh. "Happy birthday to me," I whispered. That night, instead of crying, I opened my laptop. For years I'd kept my work in the shadows. Quiet investigations, whispered referrals, late-night calls with women whose hearts had been crushed by disappearing men. But now, with my own story cracked open for the world to see, I knew hiding wasn't an option anymore. I started typing, creating a channel description, a place where stories like mine, like Maria's, like my sister's, could be told out loud. Your daily place for real emotions, brave women and true life stories. Here it's all about hope, strength, and the little miracles of everyday life. You are not alone. I read the words out loud and felt something ease inside me. Something old and wounded begin to close. Daniel had walked out of my house with his lies still clinging to him like a second skin, but I wasn't the one who would carry them anymore. On my birthday, my husband brought a family he had hidden for 30 years, and I smiled and gave him a box. He thought it was the end of his secret. He never realized it was the beginning of my freedom.